This is Still Point Radio, where it's all about the sovereignty of self, super elevated levels of freedom. Welcome. Welcome, everyone, and good evening, good day, good morning, wherever you may be. We talk about the nature of reality, truth, consciousness, centeredness, still point, the nature of the self, life and time and being. Our intent here, as usual, is to keep it real. Enjoy it and share. Thank you.
Podcast. I, as always, am your host, Tyler, joined always by Julie and Ryan.
Hey, how's it going, everybody?
Hello, welcome.
So we just finished up a extremely interesting, almost a little over 2-hour interview with Robert Otey that you're about to hear, and goodness, does it get wild. It's a fun one, guys.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't know who Robert Otey is, I would highly implore you to listen, regardless of your knowledge of really anything, because if you're a human being, you're going to learn something on this podcast.
For real.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the implications that you guys are about to hear in this podcast are intense, heavy, challenging for sure.
Oh, yeah.
They're going to, whatever your belief system is currently, even if you're, you got a pretty open mind, it's still going to challenge you. There's still going to be things you're going to learn. So it's going to be really, really good.
Yeah, just to give you a taste of what you're about to get into over the next 2 hours or so here. If you don't already know who Robert Otey is, one of the fundamental things in his unique philosophy is the idea that gravity is mythical and does not actually exist. So if right away you started to have a knee-jerk reaction just from that, I urge you, hang in there, listen to what this dude has to say. It is super duper duper interesting, and I'm sure you'll walk away with at least scratching your head going, huh? Which, if you ask me, is a successful notion to capture.
And if you walk away from this scratching your head and saying, huh, that means that you have a curiosity. Yeah. And I really think that's the most important mind to walk into this with, is that, none of the things that we're saying, I think, as a group here, we're not saying you should believe this. And, we've said that throughout our episodes. We're saying, will you just listen and consider that there might possibly be an alternate reality than what you've grown up living and knowing.
And Robert says the same thing, too. So this isn't his work, and what you're about to hear isn't dogmatic at all. It's intended to be thought-provoking before anything.
Yeah, and he's also not the first to say it. He's done a really good job of making it coherent, and he's really well studied, well researched, and he can back up. It's funny, we challenge him and other people challenge him, but he never just goes, well, I don't know. He has a legitimate, a ground to stand on.
He has a scientific background. He's got a philosophy background. He's not, somebody that's just...
And an experiential one at that.
Yeah.
But we get into a ton of stuff over these next 2 hours. Everything from why atoms don't exist, why gravity is a myth, why the universe is primarily electrical. We get into even like Jesuit conspiracies. We touch on the gravitational wave announcement that LIGO had just announced. And I mean, so much more. I mean, that's a dense 2 hours. I think you guys are going to really enjoy it, though.
And if you're a listener like I would be, and if all those things are very maybe out of your reach, just the mere fact that he says gravity is a myth is enough for me to want to keep listening.
Yeah, absolutely. Boom.
Yeah,
Boom.
You guys will like this one. So
head melter, go.
Oh, for real. Yeah. After that last 2 hours, my brain is kind of mushy, and I'm enjoying that feeling.
Mine is mushy and melty. Yes.
Awesome, guys. So we're going to jump on in here to our 2-hour interview with Mr. Robert Otey. Enjoy. We have with us today Mr. Robert Otey, a man with over 25 years of research into what we could call electric universe theory, specializing in Russellian science, the work of Dr. Walter Russell. And he also incorporates a lot of concepts from people the likes of Nikola Tesla, Victor Schauberger, Frank Chester, Dewey Larson, and many others. Robert runs the YouTube channel 77G Slinger, which, correct me if I'm wrong, Robert, I believe you have over 700 videos on that now?
Oh, yeah.
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 And then not to mention the website you run, which is feandft.com, short for free energy and freethinking.com. And you also are the author of 2 books, Gravity is a Myth and Does Not Exist, as well as Electricity is the Only Force in the Universe, which I'm sure we're going to have to touch on throughout this interview. But
yeah, that's actually one book right there.
Oh, is it? Oh, pardon
the
me.
other book. Yeah, no problem. The other book is Free Energy and Free Thinking, which is a free book. It's 1,200 pages. It's on the FE and FT site. It's a drop-down scroll. There's like 63 chapters there, scroll down box. So that's all free. That's been up there for 14 years for free.
Yeah. I love that you do that too. It goes a long way to show your intention as to why you're behind this work and not just in it to bring a new theory in to make money, but actually hopefully grow the collective knowledge.
Absolutely. And I've never asked for a dime of donation. So, this little book that I'm selling right now it's nothing. It's like $7.77, the Gravity book. So I haven't made anything. I mean, I've literally spent tens of thousands of dollars of my own money on this. I'm trying to help humanity. And so I'm not into it for the money.
Yeah.
I'll make that very clear.
Yeah. I mean, that's beyond admirable. So we all thank you for that, because we all could use that info, I'm sure. But without further ado, thanks for joining us here and welcome to the podcast.
Well, thanks so much. Nice to be here.
So, Robert, yeah, I mean, that's huge. That's something that everybody should consider. Is for $7.77, you can get Robert's new book, which talks about gravity as being a myth and not existing. So, Robert, how did you just come across this idea? How did you end up challenging the things that everybody, at least in my world, just accepts to be true? Why did gravity come into your life and you go, wait a second, something's not right here. Newton may be wrong. How did that come about?
Well, it took years and years for that to happen. It was kind of staring me in the face for a decade. But, really this all began in the fall of 1976 in my first chemistry class in college. After 6 weeks of, being taught academic chemistry, the professor said, look, this nuclear theory of the atom, it's a model. It doesn't exist. There's no such thing as a nuclear atom. And so, that's what got me thinking way back when. So that bothered me a lot. I was doing the algebra and stuff, and doing what I call the mathematics of the nuclear atom, and I just realized, well, what's the point? What is the point of going if there's no nuclear atom? Why do all this math? So I basically walked away from that class. I took a D, the lowest grade I ever got in any kind of college course, but I gave it up. I thought it was ridiculous. There was no point in studying it more. So then I went on later to graduate from the university and started studying other things after that, alternative stuff. Back in the day, you didn't have an internet. We had like leading edge research. You ever heard of these guys? Val Valerian?
I don't know if I have, actually, no.
Yeah, before the internet, there was you could buy these books. This guy Val Valerian was doing all this alternative science stuff, and there were hints of Schauberger and Tesla and Walter Russell. There was a lot of alternative stuff in there, so that got me thinking back in the 80s. And then by the 90s, come 95, I got online and started really digging deep, and I was just amazed at how many alternative versions of cosmology were out there that just made a whole lot more sense in this just diabolical garbage we were taught, So the thing about gravity is I had studied it through Russell's work, and Russell basically calls it still points of what he calls still magnetic light, which is the omnipresent still magnetic light that is within and without everything in the entire universe. In Russell's work, the magnetic universe controls the electric universe. The magnetic universe is what we call the kingdom of God. It is the creator's domain, and the creator centers and bounds every single electrical motion in this universe, because the creator is the universal mind behind all of creation. I mean, how can creation exist without a creator?
Yeah, absolutely.
So basically, Russell was saying that it's not a force. He was saying it's stillness. Just like he says magnetism is not a force either. Everything we call with magnets is electric. I mean, how do you make a magnet? You electrify iron or another metal, and all of a sudden it becomes magnetism. Well, he's saying that it's really electricism. So there's only one force in the universe. And unfortunately, Russell didn't make that very clear either. His writing was so poor, and there were so many contradictions in his works and amendments and revisions that, he had We better stop for a second. Okay, so where did I end? I just lost my train of thought there. I was at
Well, I mean, basically, you were describing Russellian science as using certain terminology, like the
right.
magnetism not being a force.
A force. Yeah, yeah. It's planes. We should get back to that. I didn't finish that with cathode planes of stillness. I should qualify those and go to my own conclusions about it.
So is that when you say cathode planes, you're talking about Russellian's concept of the cubic waveform? Is that correct?
Yeah, cubic wave fields of space. Absolutely. Those cathode planes are mirrors of still magnetic light, which is not a force. It's stillness. So this is the problem with Russell. He should have gotten rid of those terms altogether and somehow, renamed it, but he didn't. He used academic terminology, which confuses everybody. Like if you say something like still magnetic light, I mean, your average academic's going to think you're out of your mind. It's like, hold it, those words don't even go together,
Right.
So I actually wanted to get back on track with you, Robert, because I had a question. You had talked before our first little interruption there about there's one force in the universe. And then we kind of moved away from it for a second. So I kind of want to go back to that. Can you define that one force and why that's so important and the just everything? What is it?
Okay. Well, electricity. Electricity is the one force, and it's the only thing that there is. There's only electricity. I'm basically using Walter Russell's foundational model for this, and I agree with him on this, that this is a 3D cosmic light cinema. That I agree. It agrees with the high-level Maya, concept from the Hindu, that this is all illusion, and I agree with that completely. I think this is nothing but a kind of a smoke and mirrors, holodeck, fractal, holographic reality, which is being created through the creator's mind, through universal mind. So the way electricity works is it is the one thing that the creator uses to create everything. And if you look at Russell's work, it's the one still magnetic light of eternity that's divided into two sexed conditions. And those are sex spirals that want to mate with their opposites. So I've gone into great detail in that in all of my work with Russell. So if anybody's interested, that they could go through the work I've done, the many videos I have there. But I don't think we should spend too much time on that. I would just say that it is the one thing. It's the one force, and it creates 9 octaves of different pressure conditions of the sexual matings between these sex-divided pairs of male and female electric waveforms, which gives us 9 octaves of elements, not atoms, because atoms don't exist. There's no such thing as a nuclear atom.
So just to that point, I think it'll be important for our listeners. I mean, even just hearing just that, so many people in this world are so stuck in the inertia of mainstream science. Could you touch on why something like the atom doesn't exist, and as well as why I know why Einstein and all of his theories seem to be kind of made up almost, and just dispel that mainstream illusion that we're all trapped in?
Yeah, that's unfortunate. And, that St. Einstein, I mean, there's so much work debunking Einstein, but you'll never hear that from the Jewish media because that's their hero. It's like he's got the Jewish gene of genius or whatever. Just total garbage. I mean, Einstein's been debunked in every way, shape, and form. Einstein's Idiots on YouTube is a really good source for that. You Stupid Relativists is a great one. The 2,200-page book, The Manufacture and Sale of St. Einstein, is a really excellent book exposing the mannequin, the fraud that Einstein is for this false science. Let's see, as far as the nuclear theory of the atom goes, it was, I think the best way for people to really dig deep into that and see how fallacious it is would be to look at D.B. Larson's The Case Against the Nuclear Atom. It's online, it's free to read. Most people could read it in a couple hours. There's no math involved. There's any layman can understand this. And what it is it's the historical development of this abomination called the nuclear atom. And, Larson walks you through, how Rutherford with his, firing his so-called particles through gold foil and they got deflected and this and that basically meant that there was mainly open space and stuff. Well, that's actually a confirmation of Russell's work because, in the cubic wave field, the nucleus is these twin opposing vortices, and it's extremely small compared to the cubic wave field that surrounds it, which is literally millions of times larger. So it is mostly space. So it's a massive confirmation of what Russell was talking about with this, these cubic wave fields of space creating the elements. So there's no truth to the nuclear atom. It's been debunked every way, shape, and form. Yet, as I said earlier, I was told this in 1976, yet we still hear about it today. And, you know, quantum theory and string theory were brought along to try to explain away the idiocy of the nuclear atom, and yet they still talk about it. You know, it's just like Einstein and his warp gravity stuff in space and all that, yet they still use Newton's equations. I mean, this is how schizophrenic science is. You know, we hear both of these extremes, yet, you know, they're not practiced the way that they claim they are being practiced.
And do you think they're not practiced the way that they're claimed because it's just not possible to practice them, because you're basically creating, if I'm hearing you correctly, you're creating a language that doesn't really prove anything, like it doesn't exist. And I kind of wanted to touch on that whole idea of like an atom or a particle, or like the Schwarzschild proton, as like, does this really exist? I mean, when you talk to people about atoms, you talk to people about particles, that's the language that people are indoctrinated into using, right? So if you go, hey, hey, look, an atom doesn't exist, and they're going to go, what? I mean, how do you get this message through to people that don't know quantum theory or quantum physics?
Well, you don't talk to people that are heavily indoctrinated. There's no hope. There's no hope for those people. You have to ignore those people. What you're trying to, the only people I'm trying to reach with all my work are advanced researchers. I don't kid myself and believe that the masses will ever understand what I'm talking about. You know, they just don't. Most of them aren't interested to begin with. But this is not something for just the masses or somebody that's been heavily indoctrinated. The people who've been heavily indoctrinated, they will fight you tooth and nail to the end.
Absolutely.
I've been going through this for 14 years. I've heard every criticism ever imagined, but it's mostly ad hominem attacks I get. They can't debunk what I'm telling them because they have no foundation to argue from. If there's no such thing as a nuclear atom, if quantum quackery is total bullshit and string theory is total bullshit, that is the foundations of academic science. So these people are brainwashed to the core. They've got no way or no foundation to even talk back to me.
Yeah. Well,
so I just ignore them. I would never debate. It would be pointless.
Yeah. To your point, I mean, at least the people I interact with in this world, they seem to think that there is this one coherent thing we refer to as quantum mechanics, not really even realizing that there's multiple different variations of it. And all of them seem to be, to use a term you just used, kind of schizophrenic and all over the place, that, oh, well, we don't have the answer, so let's make one up rather than looking to see where we went wrong with our equation.
Yeah, and then idiotic conclusions like, oh, if you turn your back on the moon, it doesn't exist. It's only there if you're the observer. I mean, they've come up with so much psychosis due to these they're fallacious. You know, the very foundations of quantum mechanics are a fraud. The double slit experiment is a shell game. They're not firing balls. They're not firing particles through those slits. They're firing electric waveforms. They call them electron guns, but they're electrical discharge waves that are going through those slots. They're not particles. So there is no particle wave duality. It's a fraud to the core, okay? And if you go to the other pillar of quantum quackery, which is Heisenberg's uncertainty principle,
right.
It's even more idiotic because there's no such thing as a nuclear atom. There's no electron in an orbit around a nuclear atom. So the point is, it's a moot point, is what I'm saying. And it's a complete fraud. Getting a Nobel Prize for saying you can't know the position and velocity of a particle at the same time, it's idiotic. But this is the foundation of quantum mechanics. And then you think about all the psychosis of, like, you know, people like Jay-Z Knight and The Secret and What the Fuck Do We Know and all that stuff. She's got these idiotic films like Pushing Ramtha, this 35,000-year-old Lemurian warrior that's come back to her. She's channeling him. He's validated quantum mechanics. It's the one true science out there. I mean, it's staggering. The idiocy is unbelievable.
So, Robert, let me jump in here and say this. So I've had this conversation in the last 2 weeks with people just on my own, and I go, look, do you realize that when some scientists, you know, some physicists or whatever says, hey, we are colliding particles together, and if you go, wait a second, you as the physicist, like, have you ever seen or held a particle? Like, you know, when they say, hey, we're colliding particles together, I want our listeners to know that, like, no one in existence has actually ever seen a particle.
Exactly. Nor have they stripped an electron out of its orbit somehow and are firing it through an electron gun. How would they do that? How would they pull it out of its orbit?
Right.
It's a myth. And it's the same thing with electricity. They're saying that somehow those electron balls are knocking each other down copper wires or aluminum wires or whatever. It's ridiculous. I mean, they're materialists. This is the problem. They want to reduce everything to a particle. And this, the Higgs boson is what I call it, the Higgs boson. But the Higgs boson particle is just another example of that desperate materialistic nature of these atheists. I mean, these people are atheists, and this is why they don't understand creation. I mean, if you eliminate the creator from creation, you can live in this dumbed down materialistic universe where you try to always reduce everything, and the ultimate aspect of that would be the ether. These ether particles, which are billions of times smaller than so-called electrons. It just goes on and on. I mean, there's no end to it. So materialism is a fraud. This is a spiritual universe. And like I said, I completely agree with the Hindu. This is Maya. It's all illusion. It's a holodeck. I mean, that's the easiest way to explain this to the newest generation with Star Trek. They should get what a holodeck is. This entire universe is the creator's holodeck.
Yeah. Well, I think even our first indication is how weak. Oh, pardon me. I think our first indication is how weak the supposed gravity is in context of something like electromagnetism, or even the kind of, if you will, strong and weak nuclear force, which we know don't really necessarily exist, but are a product of electricity itself. But even just the fact that gravity is so infinitesimally small in comparison with that one or those other three forces, that should be our first indication that there's something seriously wrong here when you're looking at numbers that are in the 10 to the 20 something.
27. Yeah. Well, yeah, the strong and weak nuclear forces were invented ad hoc to explain away the inconsistencies of the ridiculous nuclear atom. I mean, how can you have all these protons huddled together in a nucleus that should have mutual repulsion? It's absurd. And like I said, I would just, anybody can understand how ridiculous the nuclear atom is by reading D.B. Larson's book. It's very simple. And the other thing you said about 10 to the minus 27th, or I think it's even more. I think it's 10 to the minus 37th. In the mathematics, the gravity-based mathematics of so-called electrons in the nuclear atom, that's what they say the difference is. That's 10 with 37 zeros. I mean, these eggheads can't even possibly conceive of a number that big, or so infinitesimally small. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, so then you say, okay, well, the electric force is 10 to the 37th stronger than the gravitational force. Well, that you're saying basically it's essentially nothing, Right. So even their own mathematics is telling them gravity is nothing. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
So
is that making sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that makes me immediately just ask the question for someone that's listening and hearing that. It's shocking. Why? Why has science put themselves behind these smoke and mirrors? How does that relate to the human, the American, the collective? Why are they doing this? Is it disempowerment? What's your thoughts on that?
Oh, absolutely. I can only draw one conclusion from it after looking at it for all these years, and that this is intentional. I mean, you have to understand the powers that be, the people who run this racket, the people with all the dough, they knew back in 1892 the truth. Tesla had created wireless distribution of electrical energy in 1892. This entire system we've got right now was obsolete. There was no reason to even have all these high tension wires, generators. All this stuff is a huge, massive waste of material, the resources and all that stuff. They know what the true physics is. And so if you know what the true physics is, it's easy to promote the false stuff. So when this idiotic stuff about the nuke atom and all this other stuff came along, it's very easy to promote those people and say, oh, give this guy a Nobel Prize. This guy's the cutting edge. Einstein, look at this moron. Let's make him the new mannequin for science. It's like, let's use his Gedanken experiments. This guy is sitting in an armchair coming up with these idiotic thought experiments, which cannot even be confirmed. You know what I mean? So this is how the whole thing got turned around. The reason it's done this way is because it ensures the powers that be that we keep pumping oil, that we keep fighting wars, we blowing up gas. We're in this backwards explosion-based technology, which is destroying the world. It's destroying nature. It's killing us all with disease. It's making us go murder millions of people in foreign countries to steal their resources. It's an abomination. But these people make astronomical profits off of the slave system, which
Absolutely.
is 100%, 180-degree opposite of nature. You see what I'm saying?
Absolutely. And so you touched on this just a few sentences ago, and you said that they're aware of it. So would you say that the scientists, all these people that are in historical science, I mean, do they know what's going on? Are they aware? Do they know this truth that you're talking about?
Most of them do. No. Most of them have no clue. They've been indoctrinated. They've gone along to get along. They've been awarded their degrees, and they think that they're geniuses, and because they memorized a bunch of garbage theories. I've known these people. I went to college with these folks. I got friends that were chemistry roommates. That was chemistry, studying chemistry in UC San Diego. Now he's a professor in the UC system. I was talking about this stuff to him in '82. He's like, it doesn't matter. Who cares if there's no nuclear? It's like, I'm gonna get my job. I'm gonna be a professor.
Yeah.
So most people don't care.
Oh, exactly. And even if someone of that kind of mainstream scientific stature attempted to get into the stuff we're discussing here on the podcast, they're heavily, heavily dissuaded against it because they can lose their funding, their tenure, their academic stature, and it could really ruin what they've spent 40 years setting up as a career. And I think that scares so many people off from even attempting to dive into what we might call a more true look at the world.
Absolutely. You're 100% right, man. And so this is definitely an agenda behind this, and it keeps the people in power, in power with an enormous amount of money and control, and it keeps all of us enslaved. And it's one ridiculous project after another that taxpayers are enslaved to, and this entire energy system is slavery. We shouldn't have to be paying these massive utility bills and pumping gas into our car every few days and stuff. It's just insanity.
So Robert, speaking of that, so what would you say? Well, just kind of clearly define the difference between explosion technology and implosion technology, and what would be I feel it's obvious, but just for our listeners, what would be the advantage of moving away from explosion technology and moving into something more holistic, an implosion technology?
Right, it would change the entire world. If we were to switch over to like Victor Schauberger's implosion turbines, for instance, they require no fuel. They don't run on fuel. They implode air or water. And once you get them going with an electric starter motor, they are self-perpetuating because they create an organic vacuum. And they suck air or water, and they create enormous amounts of energy. And so Victor Schauberger has the key. You work with nature. Implosion is how all of nature is working. We were talking earlier about the elements. Those male and female sexed waveforms, they're imploding together. They're to that still point, the fulcrum, which each one can become the other. It's called a rhythmic balance interchange between the male and the female. The very foundations of this electric light cinema we're involved in are these spiraling electric motions. So everything from the so-called elements to galaxies is doing the same thing.
Okay.
So implosion is the way nature works, and we need to copy nature in order to have unlimited abundance without pollution and death and disease and destruction.
Okay, so I'm what I'm hearing is also, if I'm hearing you correctly, the Schauberger model and what he was discovering primarily with water would be. Could we apply that to vortex solar systems, or the geometry or the shape of our universe at large? Are we really in a vortex?
According to Dr. Kashava Bat, we are. And
yes.
I had the good fortune of talking to Dr. Bat many times on Skype before he passed away, unfortunately, it's been about 4 years ago. He was up in Yellowstone vacationing with his wife and his daughters, and he passed on about 3 a.m. under a full moon. I had the story from his son Kumar, and he was just a magnificent man. He studied astronomy as around the globe in equatorial regions like Madagascar and Venezuela, India, places like that. For 40 years, he did observations of our local solar system. And he came up with the conclusion that we are not going around the sun. We are following the sun in the sun's equatorial discharge vortices. Because we implode through the poles and you discharge electrically through the equator. So There's a lot of evidence to back that. I've got a very good playlist with lots of that evidence in it on Dr. Kashava Bhatt's work, and I would suggest people looking deeper into it there.
Yeah, we'll definitely link to your channel and all that in our show notes as well.
Yeah.
So, okay, so I want to continue with this because I think right now people, I know I can only speak for myself, but I just kind of feel like the solar system is just this thing that's captivating people these days. And so
yeah,
I know it's hard to do this stuff without do it over audio without like models and stuff like that. But
right.
Can you just can you go further into what Dr. Kashava Bhatt's vortex looks like? Like, I know people are going, wait a second, if we're not going around the sun, I don't know how to explain it, but like we're taught as in schools, like the sun is just stationary and all the planets are just swirling around it, which to me that's almost, it's just retarded to even use that model. It's almost like a 2D model or something. So I know it's difficult, but can you like really paint that picture of like what's moving? How's the sun moving? And then where are we? And then how are we spinning? And I know also that Dr. Kashava Bhatt, he doesn't really believe that we are like technically orbiting, right, in an ellipse.
No, these will be helical trajectories following the sun. So, we have to start first with the Pancake solar system, the flat 2D, like you're saying, that's a 2D time stop version of it. And that was created by the Jesuit Catholic military priest, Copernicus. So, the Jesuits have had their hands deep into mind control science for a long time. The latest one was Lemaitre with his Big Wank theory, the Big Bang. Another Jesuit military priest. So, I mean, instantly people should question the validity of these things by who brought them to us, these Jesuits, because the Jesuits have a very, very nefarious history and an agenda. So,
well, this might be a little off topic. Pardon me, Robert, go ahead.
Okay. So anyways, the way that the sun moves is it's moving in a discharge vortex arm of the galactic core. So it's spiraling and it's moving around the galactic core. And according to Dr. Kashava Bhatt, our planets are following the sun in a large vortex as it spirals itself around the galactic core. Now, all the planets have parallel poles in this, which is a confirmation also of W.C. Wright's work on so-called gravity, his push gravity theory, which I've got a bunch of videos on my site, also showing that the planets would have, basically parallel poles, and that there is not mutual attraction of heavenly bodies in space, as NASA has told us, and in Newton, but actually it's the exact opposite. There's mutual repulsion. And W.C. Wright proved this in over 120 models that he built, showing this. So I have to kind of go along with Dr. Bhatt. I think there's a lot of information that supports his idea. If you look at something like Saturn, for instance, you'll see that according to academia, those rings on Saturn are just wobbling all over the place in a 27-year orbit. Somehow, according to this flat pancake model, the planets know how to speed up and actually pass the sun and get past it and then come around it and go slower on the way back. I mean, the whole idea is kind of absurd to begin with. How would the planets do that, And then if you look at Dr. Kashava Bhatt's work for 40 years, he said one of the most telling things is that the outer planets are actually invisible for shorter than the inner planets, which, if they were on the other side, they would be obscured for several months. Things like Uranus or Pluto or the ones that are way out there, and they're not. They're only invisible for like 2 or 3 weeks at the most. And often it's the inner planets which are hidden in the glare of the sun due to our mutual positions in our helical trajectories. Another proof of that being the transit of Venus, for instance, that if it was true that we're on a pancake, heliocentric orbit, then we would see like 2 or 3 eclipses every year of Venus. But in fact, it only happens, Venus only crosses the sun twice in 121 years, and they're 8 years apart. So I think it's like 114 years, then 8 years later. I don't remember the exact numbers, but that's all it is. So there's actually 27 proofs in Dr. Kashava's book that show that it has to be a vortex solar system, not heliocentric. And there have been people like DJ Sadhu who have produced videos. Unfortunately, their work only represents about maybe 5% of what Dr. Kashava Bhatt said. So I'm actually going to produce this spring one with my friend Hannah VH over in Belgium. She's a really awesome graphics artist and engineer. And we're going to go ahead and lay out those 27 proofs one by one, so people can actually see. Yeah, it really needs to be done, because it will quiet a lot of people on a lot of these delusional new ideas that are coming up about the Earth and the solar system.
Yeah, that right there, what you just said to me just blows my mind. I mean, I've worked with it a little bit lately, so I think I have like a decent visual in my head of what that looks like. But if I'm, I see that whole vortex thing happening everywhere, from Victor Schauberger with the vortex technology of water, where he was able to, correct me if I'm wrong, he was able to take these massive timbers down a log flume that a typical river couldn't even float. And he was able to do it using kind of like what you just described our solar system's doing, but doing it with water in like just a few feet of water, right?
Absolutely. And that was unfortunate, because all it did was pay off the King of Austria's gambling debts, and they ended up deforesting all the forests. So it was a tragic failure in that respect, but it did prove to the academic clods that he was right, about vortices. And he did build engines, turbines that worked on air as well. So they didn't, they ran on either one, air or water.
Okay. So now the question I keep coming up with this vortex solar system is people keep going. They ask me, okay, well, how do our seasons happen, right? And you just basically describe that, but I want to go deeper into it, because people that are listening to this, they've never heard terms like this. They don't know what still magnetic light is. They don't even know the sun is moving, period, And so so let me just go like this. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm getting is the sun is hucking through space at like an extremely fast speed, and it's not just going around in a flat plane. It's actually corkscrewing, so it's spiraling.
Yeah.
Okay, and then all the planets in our solar system are not. They're actually like dragging in a vortex behind them, and that vortex is just getting. It's the shape of a cone, correct?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So then on the outsides of that cone, there's going to be a certain barrier is not the correct word, but there's going to be a place where the light that's coming from our sun that makes the cone, fades into darkness, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the planets, as they're moving above and below the sun, that's what creates the seasons. It's not a tilting of the axis, and there's no wobbling of the axis either. I mean, the so-called wobble is due to the wobble of the entire solar system. The so-called precession of the equinoxes is an earthbound illusion, which people have falsely attributed to a wobbling pole. Like, oh no, the earth, we're wobbling, we're off balance. It's totally bullshit. I mean, it makes no sense whatsoever. So, but yeah, that's if you're at the top of the vortex, then the sun is shining towards the southern part of the globe, right?
Yes.
And so that would be summer down in Australia. But if you're down below the sun is shining down on the northern hemisphere, so it's summer in the northern hemisphere. And this would be the same for all planets in the solar system.
Wow.
Yeah, well said, Robert.
That's amazing. I really hope people get this. I hope they can kind of like visualize this. I've seen Dr. Kashava's models on your channel, and so I've been able to put this together. And the one thing that like kind of like just slapped me in the face was like, wait a second, none of our planets have a tilted axis, right? So they just know which way is like what we would call north or up. They just all they spin on their axis, which you would call a still point, right? A stillness is in the center of that, not an atom.
Still shaft.
There's nothing.
Yeah,
so there's
shaft.
A still shaft. So wait, so there's no. People look at a planet and they go, it's round, and then they go, an atom, it's round, right? But you're saying. No, there is no shell. There's no particle. There's no shell to a particle. There's no shell to an atom. What's actually happening in there is another vortex that's spinning at such a rate that around its own center is I don't want to say nothingness, but is stillness or still magnetic light, and that just keeps and that energy. If I'm hearing you, that energy, that still magnetic light, is self-perpetuating, always is, always will be. It's the essence of the universe, and it will never go away. And that's what great scientists like Schauberger and Tesla, and yourself, and like D.B. Larson are basically saying, hey, look, this energy is free, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
It all comes from the creator. I mean, that's everything is based upon the creator, you know, and that all the energy comes from that the fulcrum of stillness, which controls those twin opposing vortices.
You know, this makes me just, I'm having this visual in my head of you guys describing these vortices, and I'm thinking about chakras. I can't stop thinking about the way they're cones and the way they actually have this flow of energy. And then I've been learning a lot about micro chakras within them. So that's talking about the funnel within the funnel. Do you find any connection between what you're saying and something micro in like chakras?
Yeah, absolutely. Because every single thing in this universe begins as spiraling electrical waveforms. You can't build like straight stuff. You know, you can't do straight lines. You can't have parallel paths like Newton thought. You can't have a straight path like Newton thought. These things are ridiculous. The only way you can get anywhere is through a curved spiral path. So every single thing in the universe, look at your nose. It's set up to spiral the air through your nose. Look at your ears. The sound waves spiral through your ears. The cones and the rods on your eyes, they're picking up spiraling electric waveforms called light. I mean, everything is based on these spirals. I mean, look at the horns, the shells. I mean, the phyllotaxis of the trees. It goes on and on. Everything is built upon these foundational spirals. How could they be straight, you know?
Yeah,
I mean, we do have crystalline forms, and those are the exception. But those are the exception in the universe, crystalline forms.
Well, I think that just shows how accurate your theory. I mean, it seems to be so on track because we see that everything we know that at least seems to be true so far emulates nature, and this clearly is doing so. And we see, I mean, I think what you were just referring to is something like the phi ratio embodied everywhere throughout nature. So when you see the science match up with what nature's already doing, it's kind of a key that we're working in the same arena, if you will, that the creator used to manifest existence itself.
Exactly. And this is the problem with academic science. Their science explains nothing. They don't know what gravity is. They don't know what magnetism is. They don't know what light is. They don't know electricity. They have all these bizarre theories, but they can't explain anything.
Yeah. So if you don't mind, just to backtrack a little bit, I'm kind of hung up and fascinated by what you were bringing up with Copernicus and the whole Jesuit order. I have a bit of a background in conspiracy culture, and I've definitely seen a lot of different roads point to the Jesuits being kind of the perpetuators of these false motifs. So would you mind speaking on that a little bit?
Yeah, it's the Jesuits and the Zionists, of course, because you see the Zionists have all the dough, and so do the Jesuits, and they both have a similar agenda. In fact, lots of Jesuits, I'm sure, are Zionists. You know, so there have been lots of Jewish Jesuits. I mean, Adam Weishaupt was one. I mean, he created the Illuminati, for Christ's sake. You know.
Yeah, and especially now, I mean, it's such an interesting time given that, I mean, we just had a pope step down for the first time in I forget how many 100 years, and we now have a Jesuit pope.
There you go.
That's right. Yeah, you know,
they're running the racket.
Let me just put this out there for the record. This blew my mind, and you spoke about it just a little while ago, but I want to just put it out there. Do people realize, and I mean scientists or mainstream people, do they realize that the current theory that we know as the Big Bang, which there's television shows about, there's comedy sitcoms with that name, it's like a slang term. There's rappers using it as their name. You know, the Big Bang is this like talismanic colloquial term that like everybody knows about, right? So, does anybody out there realize that the entire concept of the Big Bang came from the church?
Yeah, most people don't. They don't realize that it was a Jesuit named Lemaitre that actually came up with this moronic idea that, you know, that kind of somewhat matched the Bible thing, you know, with like, you know, and God said, let there be light. But then, you know, that they've removed the creator from creation. So they never talk about the creator. They're mostly atheists. So, and as you know, Jesuits are not, it's a military order. It's not a religious order. So they don't give a damn about the creator.
Well, and I think that even speaks to the what we were talking about a minute ago with the implosion versus explosion technology. And I mean, clearly they're perpetuating the explosion type, I mean, to unfortunately the most diabolical ends that can be had.
Yes. Absolutely. These false flag wars in Iraq and Afghanistan are the epitome of this abomination. So it's disgusting. We've murdered millions of people for nothing.
Yeah,
And
I
it's
fully
just
agree.
For our enemies, the people who are the enemies of all mankind, we've murdered them for them. That's the horror of this.
That
just like we did in World War II.
That kind
Sorry,
of
I don't.
that kind of thing always trips me out too, and it's been on my mind, this whole idea. We don't necessarily have to go down this rabbit hole, but just the idea of cognitive dissonance, right? So so it's like, I mean, I'm trying to think of one off the top of my head, like that's really good, but just like, for example, I guess it's controversial, but like, going to war for oil, right? Like people will like put stickers on their car and be like, support the troops, or like, whatever, fight ISIS or whatever. And like they don't realize that every day that you get in your car, and believe me, I have a car, so I'm not saying I don't do this too, but every day you choose to vote with your dollar to go, purchase oil, or buy the newest $90,000 SUV, or ride in a Learjet, or whatever it is you're into, in some way you're like sort of ignoring or creating your own cognitive dissonance and going, we are just perpetuating the the pollution, whether it be physical pollution, psychic pollution, mental pollution, emotional pollution, spiritual pollution, worldwide, and you don't realize it, right? And so I call that cognitive dissonance. And I think what you're talking about, the implications involved in free energy, and I'll say it now, free thinking, are just incredibly massive. And it's a tricky thing. That's why we're doing this show, is we want people to think differently than that they're taught by their society. We want them to think freely, think for themselves. They don't necessarily have to say, Robert Otey, Ryan, Tyler, and Julie are all correct and they know everything. But our point is like, look, man, go out there and read D.B. Larson, read Robert Otey, read why gravity is a myth, read why Newtonian physics falls apart, read why Einstein himself said, hey, my math falls apart right here, read why how David Bohm called out his own academia in Wholeness in the Implicate Order and said, look, your physics paradigm falls short here. It's like, we're trying to like bring these ideas up, and like 0 people have heard of them.
Yeah, at least just to get someone to use their own brain and think for themselves, rather than just carrying on the inertia of what they've been told their whole life.
That's exactly it. It's all about discernment and critical thinking. And, I was blessed because I kind of fell into that down at UC San Diego. I went down there to study music because I was at Cabrillo and transferred down there. And I was extremely disappointed with the music department. I was like, and I hated academia. I thought it was so much bullshit, but I wanted to get out, get my piece of paper, get my degree so I could get a job and all that garbage. So I dropped into communications, and it taught me how to critically think, and it taught me how to write. And I think that was, one of these little things that just had to happen in my life, or else none of this could have happened. I mean, I got the tools in college in order to go through any kind of information and find out who's behind it. I mean, what's their agenda? That and what kind of lies and propaganda are they using? So those kinds of things have to be cultivated, and I think it's very rare nowadays, being that everybody's so mind controlled by the idiot box and the conditioning of school, where it's a real top down. Don't ever question the professor or the teacher or whatever. If you do, you'll be made a fool of. They'll criticize you in front of everybody and laugh at you in class or whatever. And that's the way it's done. They get you conditioned to accept their BS.
Yeah, well, I mean, even school now is, there's so many things that are even continually going wrong with it. I mean, they're now even talking about starting school as early as 2 years old, which is incredibly insane if you ask me. And then even the way the whole school system is set up, it's not to learn or to think, but memorize this, regurgitate it as I taught it to you, and do nothing more.
Exactly.
But I'm curious, you touched on, or you said you at least originally went to school for music, which I find incredibly fascinating considering at least a little bit I know about music. You learn and you work intimately with waveforms, and I'm curious how that has contributed to your understanding of Russellian science, considering it's all based in waveforms.
That's a good question. I mean, I think that musicians are, you know, you look at somebody like Jimi Hendrix, for example, and you're looking at a guy who was an absolute master of the waveform. That guy could do anything. He could control those electrical waves like nobody's business, you know? So I think there's this innate quality of musicians that they get it. You know, it's something that resonates to the core of their soul. You can feel it in the music that you create. So yeah, I think that's just it's just another little you know, arrow in the quiver as far as doing research into this stuff, is to have those abilities to be a musician.
Are you familiar with Philip Glass?
Yes.
Do you think that that kind of points in the direction you're speaking of? Because when you're talking about these waveforms, I can't help but think of an actual vortex within his music, because it's in such a circular motion. It rises and falls constantly. Made me think of that.
Oh, it's beautiful. And old Baroque music, 4-part vocal harmonies. I mean, there beautiful things came out of the churches as well, you know? I mean, and they understood these things. I mean, Eric Dollard's done some very good videos explaining, you know, was that the Glide Memorial Church or something in San Francisco with the big organs and all that. And I mean, the spiritual experience.
That's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, that takes it really deep, you know, showing you just how powerful the music can really be.
Yeah, I mean, just to backtrack real briefly, I'm curious if you have any notions on this. You just brought up Hendrix and his masterful skill with guitar and I guess you could say waveforms. I'm curious what you would think as to how entheogens play a part in that role, because clearly he was quite a psychonaut, and if I'm not mistaken, I believe you've dove in with those substances a little bit yourself.
Oh, of course. Yeah, absolutely. They helped me attain higher understanding and learning and better understanding of myself. But they're dangerous. I'm not going to be like a Terrence McKenna and promote these things.
Yeah,
I'm
certainly.
not.
I don't think any of us would want to do that.
No, I don't. I disagree with him fully. I think it's a very, very, it's not for everybody. And in fact, it's for very few. And I've had plenty of horrifying experiences where it's, you know, white knuckled hanging on, you know?
Yeah.
So, I've had some glorious, beautiful, revelatory experiences, and I've had some hellacious ones. And some of these hellacious ones that I had, I think a lot of people wouldn't have even made it through. You know, I just have an indomitable will, you know, and it's like nothing was going to take me down, and I went through the hell of it, you know.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious because at least for myself, I mean, entheogenic substances, I've only done them, I mean, a very small handful of times, but they, I mean, absolutely have been a fundamental part in, I guess, what you would call my awakening. So I was just curious how that has been a part of you and your opening up to this understanding.
Well, I think it really started back when I was 17 years old. 4 days before my 18th birthday, I'd eaten some mushrooms. They were Amazonian mushrooms. They're about a foot long with little tiny golden caps on them, and they were extremely powerful. And I was up in the mountains above Livermore. I grew up there, and there was these two huge monolithic rocks that jut out of this hillside up above Del Val Dam, and it's obviously a sacred spot. You know that whatever natives were living there, this was their place, you know. And so I was up there experiencing that night, and I was looking down at Livermore, and I could see all the lights, and it was laid out like a grid, you know. And to me, the word matrix was unknown to me, but I called it the grid. And I was like, I looked down, I'm a product of that grid, you know, down there. The church, my parents, school, the idiot box. I mean, it's all from that. And here I am on this monolithic rock experiencing, you know, just oneness with the creator and seeing the beauty of creation all around me and everything. It's a whole different level. And I'm like, that was the moment I realized I'd just been mind controlled, you know? And so I think that moment is when my search really began, about 4 days before my 18th birthday.
You know, that just brings up such a powerful image is like you're looking down on what we would call like the modernization of man, right? You know, not that there's anything wrong with cities and villages and having everything you need, you know, a block or two away. But it's interesting if you look at, you know, most native cultures around the world, they didn't build their cities or towns like that. They were much more harmonic in nature. As a matter of fact, you can look at them from the air and see, you know, teepees or hogans or wherever you are, and you realize, oh, they didn't put them into squares and into grids. As a matter of fact, they look they look random, right? But they actually they sort of intuitively put them in a certain place to where the sunlight, the water, it's usually near a river, or the resources are, and it's so interesting that like our let's say left brain scientific sort of explosion based, annihilation based science is going to like build a grid and then not only put you physically in it, but they're going to put you in it, mentally, and go, this is the way that the universe is, and this is it. You can't challenge this. You can't look beyond it. As a matter of fact, we don't even want you to think for yourself. And so that's interesting that the natives would build their homes like that, but they also, and I have some connections with the Native Americans in the Lakota in Pine Ridge, and I can tell you it's funny when I talk scientific stuff and I talk about like the solar system being spirals. They clearly get it. They don't use atomic language, but they go, oh yeah, we see that. So it's weird how they just know it. They figure it out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because we have access to all knowledge within it. It's called self-knowledge. I mean, unfortunately, the idiot box has removed a lot of that, because what they call daydreaming is actually our most powerful tool. It's really called mentally imaging. And if you develop that skill of mentally imaging, you can see all the things that I'm talking about. I mean, I've spent tens of thousands of hours mentally imaging things in order to validate these processes in my own mind. And I think that's largely been taken away because of the idiot box, and having Hollywood, put the images in our mind instead of us using our own minds to generate our own images.
Yeah, no, you bring a couple really good points up right there. I mean, one of my kind of big like holy shit moments was from a lecture I was listening to from Jordan Maxwell, just talking about where even the etymology of Hollywood comes from. Is that from the ancient Druids, that the wands that they would use to conduct magic were made out of the holly branch. And the whole, I mean, even just the name Hollywood itself insinuates that what they're doing in that city is to do, I guess you could use even like Aleister Crowley's term, magic, and to change the world to meet their will. Yeah,
it's sorcery. And it started off as Hollywood, now it's Hellywood. So it's degenerated to the depths of hell now. I mean, it's such garbage that's churned out by Hollywood now. It's just disgusting.
Yeah, I mean, even just the fact that you said that we're how daydreaming is kind of looked down upon, I think speaks so much. I mean, you can even only look back a couple of decades, and it was, I mean, and even still is a really negative thing to call someone a dreamer. And I think that just right there encapsulates the, again, we were talking about the cognitive dissonance.
Yeah. And then, the teacher's like pointing at the blackboard, and she's like, follow my white strokes on the black door. Don't look out the window. I mean, daydream and look at nature and the wonder of creation. Look at this mind control garbage I've got here on the blackboard for you.
Well, let's even look at the dissolution of our educational system with creativity. In the last 20 years, we've had the entire educational system has taken out the arts, and their excuse is, standardized testing is really what's more important, because learning these lines and dots is much more important than anybody using their actual intuition, which creativity, to my understanding, is the closest version that I can explain on my personal experience to being God. If I didn't have church, if I didn't have anything, I have my creativity, as I love, Ryan brings this up a lot, the sovereign self, the individual, and to your point, being able to access that inner knowledge and inner self. So of course they would want to mute that within the system where you're teaching children how to live on an everyday basis. It's sad.
Exactly. And if you look at like Susan Iserbyt's work, on her book Deliberate Dumbing Down of America, have you all ever read that?
No.
Oh, well, it's big. It's a thick book, and it goes through the 150-year chronological dumbing down techniques used by the powers that be to create the kind of clones, the button pushing clones that they want for their society. So it's not a conspiracy theory. These are facts. I mean, she was a high level ranking administrator in the education system here in the United States, and she's blown the top off the whole thing. This is all deliberate. You can look at like an 1898 exit exam for for a 6th grader in Kansas, and none of us could pass it. I mean, I couldn't pass it right now, and I've got an enormous amount of learning and stuff, but they were taught much, much better then than we are now. But I was an 8th grade exit exam is what it was. I couldn't pass it right now, to be honest with you.
Wow. You even look at, I think, the East, you know, comparing it to the West, their standardized testing and their ways of learning is so different. And I don't know what the actual differences in your opinion are of the East versus West, but I remember as a young girl having people come over as exchange students, and they would be like, "Are you about 10 years behind?" And I would just be like,
Right.
"I don't know. This is really hard for me. I thought I was smart. I'm
mean,
getting an A. What do you
To your point,
mean?"
we've seen I mean, the U.S. position as far as education goes, it's been dropping dramatically for decades.
True.
Yeah. And even from one state to the next. Like I came out from Louisiana to California in 1966, and I was at the top. Well, when I came out here, I was at the top of my class. I mean, I was like way beyond the people in my same class. And so it just showed me that what the education I was getting in Louisiana was better than what I had here in California.
Well, especially knowing that, I mean, the existent education system was really exclusively built to create factory workers. It wasn't made to create free thinking people who could go out and, I mean, discover or learn new things about our world. But it's like, no, we're going to stick you in the box, and this is training to do so.
Exactly. That's why it's so important. You know, these schools like, you know, the Steiner schools, for example, the Waldorf school.
So great.
Love Rudolf Steiner.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's a step in the right direction. It really is. Have you read his the Light course, for instance?
I've read some of it. I've also read The Philosophy of Freedom, and which is a brilliant book by Steiner. And then I've also read man, he's got one it's very mystical, but it's really about the ancient Druids. I forgot the title of it, but it's just brilliant.
Yeah, he's got a lot of very mystical stuff. I don't tend to follow his esoteric stuff so much, but you know, the Light course, for example, it's a methodology for looking at doing empirical research and correctly observing it and drawing correct conclusions, as opposed to the kind of weird ad hoc garbage inventive science. These eggheads just come up with the strangest theories out of nowhere, you know. And so his Light course is all about that. It's how to do proper science, and it's based on a lot of Goethe's work. You know, I mean, looking at color and light and stuff. And Goethe actually disproved Newton and showed a much deeper understanding of light. So that was incorporated into Steiner's work as well. So I mean, I would highly recommend if you got kids, send them to Waldorf. I mean, that'd be the best thing for them.
So I have a kind of a heavy question for you. So if we were to take away the theories of gravity and you were to see and observe a universe that was similar to ours, that had the theories of the electric universe, what would children be like? What would people be like? What would our society look like? Would it be this kind of utopia that people talk about, or would it be something we couldn't even imagine?
I doubt it. I don't think. I think humanity is at a very barbaric level right now. But if you take away gravity, which I've done in my work, what that does is it frees you from dozens and dozens of ridiculous, you know, theories like neutron stars, dark matter, dark energy, gravitational collapse, event horizons. I mean, I could go on and on. All this crap is based on this false notion of gravity, you know. So that's why I did the gravity book. I could do a book on every single one of those topics, but if I do gravity, it's a domino effect and it takes them all out because they're all based on the false gravitation-based cosmogony. So that's why I did the gravity book.
Yeah. I mean, even just to look at it through a single lens of your philosophy, I mean, if you just take the fact that free energy can exist and you look at what that could impact in the world, just that singular change alone, I mean, everything from free and wireless electricity like Tesla was working on, to where we wouldn't have people worrying about how they're going to heat their homes or stay alive, or food production, or I mean, a million other things. Like that one concept alone would, I think, absolutely create a new paradigm for us.
That's why I've put all this work into it. This is the only thing I've done this for, is to bring free energy technologies to humanity, is to make people aware of this, to wake them up and say, hey, look, this stuff actually exists. The military has it right now. They are using that technology, but they won't give it to us. It's time that we demand the immediate release of this to change this world from the hellhole it's become into a much, much better world. I mean, just imagine all the spin-off technologies alone once the engineers, get their minds around these ideas. This stuff can be implemented in every single thing we do. And we can tear down this horrible grid, all these horrific wires hanging in the sky, marring our view. Imagine the enormous wastage of metals, steel, copper, aluminum. I mean, there is no shortage of these resources. They've all been squandered for a slave prison system. And that's what we all live in this entire world. Imagine the billions of tons of all these metals that can be recycled immediately. Tear this crap down and start again, and work with nature.
Wow.
It's very simple.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, you make me even think, I forget where I saw this in the exact number, but I think the U.S. government holds something like 250 unique patents for free energy technology, and every time a new one seems to crop up, they get suicided, or whatever term you want to attribute to it, but inevitably their whole laboratory gets broken into, all their work gets stolen and hidden within the catacombs of government.
Absolutely. There's 5,200 metric tons of thorium nitrate sitting in the desert down in Area 51, buried down there, that our government, taxpayers have paid for it and stuff. It's ours. That thorium could run this planet for 50 years, the entire planet, with thorium reactors.
Wow.
Which are radioactive, but they're not like uranium reactors. These can't explode. They can't go critical. They're totally safe. They're nothing to worry about. Thorium's extremely easy to get. I mean, I'm all for radioactive energy as far as coming from thorium, and that being its only source, not uranium. I'm completely opposed to that.
And even with Tesla, I remember hearing recently that when he died, that the FBI rolled up to his house and they were taking out something like, I can't even imagine how many boxes of his studies, so that and they haven't been declassified. And how long ago was that? It's because they don't want any science at all being influenced by his free energy thinking.
No, there's no way. They don't want any of this stuff. And they want it all. And they can justify it, too, in their twisted minds. They can say, look, this is all about national security. We can't let humans have these things. I mean, if everybody's got their own little flying UFO, they could crash it into the White House. Or they can come up with all sorts of bullshit excuses. But the thing is if they cut this stuff loose to us, it'll transform humanity. I'm not saying give, crazy people little flying UFO things that they can fly around and do stuff. We would have to be, graduated into this slowly. Like the major transportation systems could be large UFOs to begin with. Replace the jets, right? Replace all these various forms of public transportation. When humanity actually starts to become less barbaric, then we could start issuing licenses for people to fly these things around.
Well, national security is kind of a funny thing because people get patriotic and they get behind whatever group or nation they're in. But and I can't remember where I read this. It's fairly recent. I can't remember, so I can't quote who I'm talking about. But they basically were doing statistics around the first world, mostly Europe, Australia, and America, and showing that it's their own governments, or let's say our own governments, that are responsible for killing more people than anything else. And so it's funny when people go, well, it's about national security. We can't let these whatever weapons get in the hands of our terrorist enemies, when again there's a cognitive dissonance going on where people don't realize that our own governments are responsible for, and people hate to hear this, but they're responsible for lots and lots and lots of deaths of their own citizens. Oh yeah, absolutely. And innocent civilians. I mean, these soldiers that go over to Iraq and Afghanistan, they don't fight other soldiers for the most part. They kill civilians. I mean, 90% of the people that are dying are civilians, okay? And it's much easier to light up a van full of, a family that's trying to escape and kill them all than it is to go against another soldier, And this is the thing that sickens me about war, is these guys aren't heroes. We don't want to support our troops. These people are idiots for signing up to be in the military to begin with, because all these wars are based on fraud and lies. I mean, the World War I was a fraud. World War II, every war since then. If anybody has any doubt, there's a really good documentary by Bill Moyers. It's called The Secret Government. It talks about the CIA going out and destroying one country after another since 1953. I mean, the goals and these nefarious freaks that run this racket,
are to, you know, conquer the world, and Americans just sit by and let it happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. I can't even begin to tell you how shocked I was when I first found out that the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which was drilled into my head through school, was completely fabricated.
Yeah, it was. They were doing sound testings with explosions for Chevron, right?
Yeah.
Standard Oil. So yeah, I mean, it's pathetic. You know, it's all false flag. You know, for Christ's sake, all these things. You know.
Yeah.
I mean, the USS Liberty. I mean, you can go on, and a lot of this is done by the Mossad, because you know, their motto is war by way of deception, and so they love doing false flags. They'll dress up like
dialectic, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. You just blame it on the Arabs, you know. And why are they blaming it on the Arabs? Because the Arabs are the biggest impediment to Zionist control of the planet. You know, the Arabs are not going to let the Zionists come in with their goddamn banking system, their debt-based money where they've enslaved all of us to. They're not going to allow that. There's no way.
Yeah.
And you know, this comes up a lot for me as well. It's like I'll have this conversation with my friends or family, and I'll start, you know, going, hey, I researched this or that, and it points to stuff like what you just said. And again, I'm hammering this home, this cognitive dissonance. So for all my friends and family out there that are listening, it blows me away when, like, for example, like the CIA released the top secret Kennedy files that have been held for a very long time, like I think just a couple months ago. And they have like 10 things that they listed that are now public. And I'm not going to go through all 10 of them, but the very first one says, and you can read it for yourself. It says, the U.S. government and the CIA told you a different story in the news media and in newsprint back in 1963 when it happened, when they released the information about all the people involved, who shot who, and how it went down. The very first thing that they released just a couple months ago is that we lied to you, and we did it to protect you. Right. And so people will walk around and they'll read that today and they'll go, oh, it's okay. The CIA lied to us and it's okay now. Now they're telling us the truth. So it's okay. And I'm like, no,
right.
Don't you see that they lied to you then? They lied to your grandparents. They lied to your grandparents' grandparents, and they're lying to you now. And it just blows me away how people, they'll hear our show. People might listen to this show and go, oh, you know, you guys are just all conspiratorial. But you know, none of those people that challenge me, none of them ever read and do research. They just spit forth, you know, an opinion.
They go along to get along. Yeah. Hey, I got to stop it for a second. My batteries, I just hear them. My battery supply has gone down. I'm going to have to fire up my generator.
No problem. I was actually just going to ask you, it's been just over an hour. We're happy to do another hour if you're okay to go along with it. But if you want to call it, we're totally okay with that.
Well, no, let me go fire up my generator. I'll be right back.
Yeah, no worries, I want to make sure we get into gravity a bit more. Okay.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay.
I'll be right back.